The idea is the magic. You got to have the idea. Without an idea, I think you're just crunching some numbers. But the work that goes into it is often that X factor to make sure that the work is finding its way into the world. You know his famous quote, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration.
Hi, I'm Jason Harris, and you're listening to Soul and Science. Fast forward your marketing mind in about 20 minutes. Welcome to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by someone that I have admired for at least over a decade in marketing, Linda Boff, Chief Marketing Officer at GE. We're going to have a fantastic conversation. Linda is GE's CMO, Vice President, Learning and Culture, and President of GE Foundation. She oversees global marketing, brand, content, digital, and sponsorships, while also managing GE's learning and leadership at GE Crotonville, GE's philanthropic arm, and co-leading the GE Women's Network. She brings a strategic mindset, global perspective, and expertise in communications to her role. She also ties together marketing, learning, and philanthropy to expand and show GE's impact on the world. Under Linda's leadership, GE's marketing campaigns and fresh approach to media technology and content have driven strong results in global brand growth and recruitment efforts. Passionate about all things digital and the future of media and communications, Linda is recognized as one of today's most influential executives. She was named 2017 Adweek Brand Genius and was named number 5 on Business Insider's 50 Most Innovative CMOs list. She's been on many more lists, but those were only 2 that we pulled. So Linda's been long applauded in the industry, very well known, and has done a lot throughout her career. And today's episode theme is success through reinvention. Thank you for joining us, Linda. We are very excited to chat with you.
Jason, thank you for that extremely warm introduction. And I can't think of some place I'd rather be or someone I'd rather talk to. You and I have been up to some good fun in the past and been great co-conspirators and partners. And I love the idea of your podcast, Soul and Science. That's what it's about. So thanks for having me.
Before we get into success through reinvention, I always want to know the Linda Boff origin story. How did you get into marketing? Were you a happenstance marketer, or was it a career that you sort of by design knew you wanted to get into?
I think it was, Jason, it's a great question. I think it was a little bit of both. So I've never been a believer in career ladders, probably because I've never had a career ladder of I was on the bottom rung and I saw the top rung and I wanted to climb that and I knew what that would look like. Never had that. I think what I had was a lot of curiosity about how people think and behave and what influences them. I was a psychology, political science major, so, runs a little bit deep there. I come from a relatively big family, oldest of 4 girls, so I am endlessly fascinated with the application of what you and I call marketing, right? Not just the work, but how it's received, how it's taken. So I think it's one of those things where the more I understood what marketing is, the more I started to fall in love with it.
Yeah. And how did you find your way to GE?
Before I got to GE, I was working at Citigroup, big financial services company, really liked it. And I got a call from GE, and I was intrigued. Again, goes back to this idea of, I'm not much of a stepladder person. I'd never worked for an industrial company. I'd worked for a financial services company. I'd worked for a publisher. I'd worked on the agency side. And I think in some ways to be in marketing is to love the new, to love what's around the corner, what's, for me, something that I hadn't done. So I was immediately intrigued by, hey, here's a company that at that point was making everything from refrigerators to Seinfeld to jet engines, right? Like truly eclectic at the time. And I was intrigued by that. Then I started to meet some people, here. The first person I met was somebody who is still a friend and I consider a mentor, Beth Comstock. Sort of fell in love with Beth and her vision, and then the more I got to know folks here, and I expect we'll talk about this a little bit. GE really is Thomas Edison's company. It is a company that is about invention and figuring out what problem there is and then trying to solve it. So, company of problem solvers. And I found that 18 years ago, hard to believe that, it was as though I put on a glove that fit really well that I didn't know was quite missing. It wasn't as though I didn't like my other jobs that I'd had up until then. So there was a cultural fit and I think a fit too around the mission of what we do for the world and haven't looked back.
I love the fits like a glove. And I think when we think about successful careers through reinvention, sometimes we often think about that as moving to a different industry or moving to a different career path. How do you think about reinventing yourself as a marketer, but still staying at a company for almost 2 decades?
Yeah, I love the question because I think in some ways, and I admire people who in their career have reinvented by going to wholly new companies and wholly new industries, and I think that's terrific too. So I guess I was able to reinvent at GE for a few reasons. One, we are such a diverse company. You know, jet engines, wind turbines, MRIs, we run the gamut. So it's hard to get bored with our product set at GE. And of course, within our product set, we're always innovating. So there's a diversity when it comes to the technologies that we put into the world. We're in, just about every country. So there's also the diversity of landscape. And when I sit here and think back, oh my God, 2 decades, wow, the world has changed. When I got to GE, we weren't even in Web 1.0. Now we're in Web 3.0. So I think when you have the kind of opportunity I've had at GE, it's been that of an evolving set of technologies, certainly an evolving business. We can talk more about that, but also the world of media and technology and content has evolved as well. And the opportunity, Jason, to match those things up, match our invention with what's going on culturally, what's going on technologically, those opportunities. Wow. I love that. I love those intersections.
Do you have any advice for people that want to stay somewhere for a long time and don't think jumping to the next thing for growth is the answer, but they really want to, they found a glove that fits and they want to stay? Do you have any advice for someone?
I would say a couple things, maybe two pieces of advice if you're at a company and you don't necessarily want to leave, but maybe you're a little bit stuck. So one is that it is remarkable how tempting something on the outside can be that feels as though it's offering this white sheet of paper. Sometimes it is, but I have seen great career reinvention inside a company. I don't think you need to leave to reinvent. But I'll tell you something I have done with varying degrees of success, which is every now and then I will ask myself, if I were starting this job today, what would I be doing? And would I be doing exactly what I thought I'd be doing that day? Or would I have a fresh look? Would I be talking to different people? Would I be exploring different things? So I think sometimes you have to give yourself permission to restart yourself. And I find that pretty invigorating because we can all obviously, you get into the groove. And in some ways grooves are good. And in some ways they're terrible because all of a sudden you're just kind of, having the same conversation and you have to almost shake yourself up and say, nope, got to start again.
Yeah, you can get stuck going through the motions versus deciding that you know, this is what we're going to accomplish this year or this next 3 years, whatever the goals might be. So
Yeah.
I love that. You describe yourself as a keeper of the flame for GE. GE is 130 years old. It's in 175 countries. How do you? I think your advice about career reinvention is really great. How do you keep a 130-year-old flame alive, and how do you think about, as leading marketing for the company, reinventing the brand?
I'm a big believer, Jason, in this idea of fresh and familiar. If you only have familiarity, but you're not kind of um, taking that fresh lens and thinking about, okay, well, yep, it's terrific. We have a well recognized brand. What makes it relevant? It's not enough to be revered. How are you relevant? How are you contemporary? We are fortunate because our brand has long stood for innovation. And as you know, one of the things that we have done, even in our marketing, is say, well, we've got a lot of permission to be innovative in our marketing because it's part of our DNA. It's part of our business strategy. So, whether that's, how we express ourselves on different social channels, or frankly, even, doing things in media or technology that haven't been done before, to me, that reinforces who we are. It's not something cacophonous. It's actually something affirming. So I think it is this zoom in, zoom out that I'm so fond of, right? Great mission, strong bed of trust. The world needs GE. The world wants GE to succeed. That's wonderful. But how do you kind of make sure that you're just putting some fresh deposits in the bank all the time, not leaning back only on the past?
I love the. I feel like fresh and familiar can apply to the brand and to personal careers as well. And I think that idea of reinvention is really poetic and a great way to think about it. And you mentioned Thomas Edison, and I know you often look at the future, but go back to the founder. And is there something that you look at when we think about building for the future that you draw on from him, or values, or something that you always sort of think about?
What I admire when I think about Edison are a couple things. Yes, he was an inventor, one of the great inventors, but he was somebody who invented and commercialized. It wasn't as though it was just about inventing the light bulb, it was actually bringing it to households around the country. And I love, Jason, I love, the twinning of things and the idea that he was an inventor as well as in some ways a commercial marketer. That's perhaps stretching it a little bit far, but it's not enough to just have the idea. You know his famous quote, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. The idea is the magic. You got to have the idea. Without an idea, I think you're just crunching some numbers. But the work that goes into it is often that X factor to make sure that the work is finding its way into the world in the right way. And I think to me that is Edisonian in many ways.
You think about invention and innovation, and then you assume the world just adopts it. But you don't think about, okay, that was the 1%. Then you had to make sure it was everywhere. And that is the selling and the marketing and the, boots on the ground of making it come to life. One thing about your career at GE is, how there's all those studies that come out about the tenure of CMOs and how they last, I don't know, 2.2, 2.8 years. How do you think, you must have some magical leadership quality that you've been able to stay as long as you have? How do you, and that's obviously probably because reinvention, because the company is constantly changing. Do you have a philosophy on how you've been able to be successful for so long?
I'd say maybe there are a couple things that have helped me and maybe will help people listening. I don't know. So I am a cockeyed optimist. That is my approach to life. It's my approach to life. And so I am interested in getting to yes if there's a way to get to yes. Now, there's an Achilles heel to that, right? Which is, sometimes that can mean that I have too much on my plate that I'm considering and I'm juggling a few too many balls. But I have a proclivity, maybe it goes back to what you and I talked about with regard to curiosity, to what the possible is. And, when you've been someplace for a while, I think it is important to recognize the possible, recognize what you could do to reinvent, to look at something from an entirely different lens. The second is I have been blessed with extraordinary teams of people who are a privilege to lead. And often, Jason, I will feel as though, if I have a good day, it's because I've spent, 30, 40% of my day on my team and culture and clearing obstacles. Right. There's a point in your career, I believe, where, if you hire great people, you make it possible for them to do great work. And I think that as you get further along in your career, the people leader side, the culture side is just that much more important. Um, I tend to presume good intent. I'd say most of the time it serves me well. Once in a blue moon, I'll be caught naively, but most of the time, I actually really believe people intend well. And life's a whole lot more fun when you have that view because you're not kind of, listening to that crazy inner voice saying, oh, better watch out for that. So I think those are some things that have helped me.
I think those are fantastic life values, not just work values. I think the good intent is, I subscribe to that as well. And it can be hard sometimes when you're proven wrong, but you have to keep going with that. And I think the optimism, that's a value that we hold as well. And I think that is just critical to not get stuck in the obstacles, but to keep going. And it has to be balanced with pragmatism, right? And you can't have blind optimism. You have to have real pragmatic optimism, and it has to be grounded in reality. So I think that those philosophies are fantastic. Switching gears a little bit because we do talk about soul and science, and obviously when people think of GE, science comes to mind. It has to, and the brand also, even though it's B2B, worldwide, it has to have a soul and it has to be one of those, brand has to be recognized so that if you're buying MRI machines or jet engines, that the brand has value. So how do you foster soul inside the brand with a brand that's so sort of science focused and science driven?
So, Jason, when I think about like how we show up, how the GE brand shows up, to me, it's always about showing up the way a person would show up. Um, the more human, the more relatable, the more humorous, the more magical, the greater opportunity I believe we have to engage people. And I'm not talking about necessarily being frivolous, but rather being a brand that is just so damn interesting. And I think in embracing our interestingness and doing it in a way that's human versus how a conglomerate would show up or how a company would show up, that's a North Star for me in almost every piece of content that we put out.
Right. As we focus on this idea of reinvention, you're not only the CMO, but you're the president of the GE Foundation. And you also do a lot with the GE Women's Network. I think you co lead it. And learning and culture for G overall. So those are a lot of hats. There's a lot of hats to wear. When you've got clout and success at an organization or a brand, when you want to take on these other things like the GE Women's Network, you know, that's part of your reinvention, I'm sure. Those are things that you want to leave that legacy. You want to scratch that itch of like, I'm not just marketing, I'm also making a dent and a difference.
I guess I see the things I work on as being additive to where the company's going, and that's what's important to me. And I'm a dot connector. I mean, by nature, I'm a collaborative person. I like to connect dots, and you've been in a company for a while. You get particularly good at that. And I think when I connect some of the dots that we're talking about, we're talking about different ways to drive forward the soul of the company. And in some ways, I think when CMOs are doing their very best work, they are guarding the soul of the company.
I love that. The guardian, as CMO, is the guardian of the soul of the company. I've got one more question, then I'm going to ask you some personal questions. But one more question on GE. I know there's been a lot of press and a lot of talk about it's moving into these three separate companies: healthcare, energy, aviation. There are many more sectors prior. How does that make you feel as seeing it undergo so much change? And is that like are you excited about this change? How do you feel like that's going to reflect on the brand?
Yeah, I mean, we made a big announcement last November that we were going to form three separate companies. The way I think about this from a brand lens is GE has had this incredible role in history, as you and I have talked about, and in present, and the role that GE will have in the future will continue, but it will be through, the formation of three GEs, so to speak. Now, we haven't announced the branding yet. I'm working really hard on that part of it, but the DNA of GE will live on in these three companies. Um, I think it's a great move for our employees at those three companies. They will be able to get that much closer to customers. I think it's a great move for investors who are interested often in, hey, I want to invest in a med tech stock. I don't necessarily want to invest in an aviation stock or vice versa. So I think it brings a lot of focus. And I think, this in some ways is core to the conversation you and I are having today, which is how do you reinvent? If you fall too in love with how things have always been, you're not open to the possibility. And I think this unlocks a lot of possibility.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it sounds like a really smart, innovative move that will make each of those grow faster and stronger than trying to have everything combined.
That's right.
I think focus is always good. Okay, so some Linda Boff questions because we are at the tail end here. I always wonder, is there someone in your career or personal life or an author, anyone that you looked up as a role model that sort of helped you in your growth or your career or grow as a person? Do you have a role model that comes to mind?
Jason, so many people have helped me. People I've worked for, people who've worked for me. But number one is my dad. My dad was a physician until he was 82 years old, a practicing physician until he was 82 years old. And then he started, after that, just going to a local clinic so that he could continue to do what he loved doing. And ever since I was a little girl, he would say to me, Lynn, I don't care what you do, just make sure you're passionate about it. And, that's a gift. I mean, that's just a gift. And to have seen somebody who loved what he has done for an entire lifetime, and then to kind of know that for my dad, it didn't matter what we did; it mattered how happy we were. And I don't think it gets better than that. I mean, there are lots of people I admire in business, but for my whole life, that's rock solid.
You're a self-proclaimed modern art junkie. Is there a piece of art that has inspired you, or when you close your eyes, you always think of a particular piece of art?
Beautiful question. I don't know that I have a single piece of art, but there is something, Jason, when I walk the halls of a MoMA that just fills me with almost that religious like feeling that I guess other people get at church, of just like spiritual opening. I love it. It does something for me.
That's amazing. What is a quote or a mantra that Linda Boff thinks about?
There's an Edison quote I really love, which goes back to some of our conversation. It's I will not say that I failed 1,000 times. I will say that I discovered there are 1,000 ways that can cause failure.
That's amazing. Linda, you are a powerhouse. You're smart, successful, empathetic. And one thing from talking with you and working with you a little bit, you're a kind person, which is the most important element for anyone to have, I think. Thank you for your time. And we really appreciate it.
Jason, I love the conversation. Thanks so much.
Soul and Science is a Mekanism podcast produced by Maggie Bowles, Ryan Tillotson, Tyler Nielsen, Emma Swanson, and Lily Jablonski. The show is edited by Daniel Ferreira with theme music by Kyle Merritt. And I'm your host, Jason Harris.